It's what's kept me sane over 20 years of chronic pain, and by embroidering, it stopped me getting so frustrated and angry, and it kept my mental health on an even keel.
Everybody at church starts calling me like crazy. You've got to watch this on Channel 11. You've got Tourette syndrome. I was like, no, I don't. The doctor told me I don't cuss and I don't bark like a dog, so it can't be Tourette's.
And I got this board out. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. But what I did do was a lot of healing.
And I thought, do you know what? I don't even like this bloke. It's all about ambition. And I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. If I can get myself out of this situation, this illness situation, and get my health back, I'm going to make a life change.
Creativity Found is 100 episodes old. And if you haven't listened to all 100 episodes, well, why ever not? I started this show on a whim. Well, what I mean is I started this podcast on a really good idea. At least I thought it was a good idea. And with 100 episodes, a healthy amount of downloads, and a lineup of great guests with fascinating life stories seen through the lens of finding their creativity later in life, I guess I'm not the only one. Making this show has been my own Creativity Found story. Not that I knew that at the start, but it has shown me things about myself and benefited my life in very many ways. But it's not about me. Well, maybe it's a little bit about me. Instead, I wanted to use this celebratory episode to recap the journey of the Creativity Found podcast and to introduce you to or remind you of some of the wonderful people I've met along the way. Feel free to listen anew or again to any of these episodes and, of course, any of the other ones that you'll find in the back catalogue. So let's begin. While running drama and singing classes for adults in Oxford and networking to promote those classes, I had started to hear stories from everyday people about how they once loved a particular creative pursuit but did not continue it into adulthood for whatever reason. I also knew a few people who had had those experiences, but who had also picked up their creative tools again at some point in their grown-up lives. During lockdown in mid-2020, I decided that I could share stories like these by creating a podcast. Podcasts can be made by anyone and broadcast to anyone, so it was the perfect medium for me. It costs little money, so I had little to lose. Well, except for a chunk load of time, but I didn't yet know that. I started to research the background info. You don't need to know about all that. And at the same time, got in touch with a couple of friends who I knew had these stories to tell. And so the first few episodes were created. One of those friends was Karen Joy, who you can hear in episode 5. I didn't release them in order of recording, FYI. We recorded a metre apart, but in the same room as each other, which doesn't happen now. And here's what Karen had to say about gaining confidence through creating and showing her paintings. You've mentioned about exhibiting and selling your work. Has that helped boost your confidence?
Yes, it has to, obviously. If somebody gets you and they want to take a piece of you home, it is the most wondrous feeling. It really, I'm getting choked up about it now. What is interesting is when I do exhibitions, and I've got 2 or 3 pieces that I know they're the ones I like, and 9 times out of 10, they're the ones that sell first, or that sell, which has told me something. Stop producing quite so much. Just put what you know is right. I've learned that this last few weeks. But yes, it boosts your confidence tremendously, but it's difficult. Well, I can sell them if they're like this. Do I paint what I know I can sell?
Right.
But then if you paint, as I've discovered, what you think you know you can sell, but your heart is no longer in it, I don't know whether they don't look as good or whether I don't think they look as good.
Yeah. My first guest that wasn't a friend, but is now, was printmaker Jerry Coles. Her episode, number 3, is to this day the most downloaded and continues to be listened to every month. This is one of my favourite things about making podcasts. Episodes that you made years ago can still be being listened to today, and you never know when a new listener is going to find your show. Let's hear from Jerry.
I used to love going in and bringing my bag of materials or bringing my glitter and my cardboard and doing various things with them. And I used to be sort of like known as the go-to lady for coming in and helping make stuff. And there's a couple of different incidents happened while I was, my children were at school. The first one was they had a pop-up art show. As all the artworks were hung and I was sort of looking around it, it sort of dawned on me that there was some very, very good work and there was some less good work. But it just dawned on me that these were ordinary people, people like me that were just doing art but still doing it. That not just talking about it or doing stuff with the kids and the Pritt sticks and the glitter. They were actually doing it and bringing it in. I felt quite cross because I thought, well, you used to do that, Jerry. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing it? Why are you fiddling around with the Pritt sticks? Anyway, so that was the thing. I do remember actually being quite cross with myself that I sort of let this go.
Yeah.
And the other thing was completely separately, and one of the TAs said to me, "Oh, I bet you do some lovely stuff at home, don't you, Jerry, when you're not messing about with the children?" And I sort of thought, oh, no, I don't. And that really dawned on me that I just stopped. I don't really do anything for myself that I would call proper art, inverted commas.
Yeah.
And I just think those kind of things then started to maybe turn the wheels in my mind that, kick up the backside. Come on, you used to really enjoy this.
Yeah.
That sort of was the feeling.
That clip touches on the impetus people have to start getting creative, but why do they stop in the first place? Of course, I've heard lots of reasons, many of which overlap. For some, it is being told by a teacher that they weren't good at something, or comparing themselves to others around them. Many guests as youngsters had no understanding of how creativity could be used in adulthood or even turned into a paid-for living. Or they were encouraged to follow a more standard, accepted educational and career path. For others, illness, trauma, or low self-esteem played a part in holding them back. Let's hear from Fish Lee, episode 70, Rowena Roberts, episode 61, and Rich Chambers, episode 73.
I wasn't screaming out swear words. I wasn't barking like a dog. I wasn't convulsing on the floor. So those things didn't draw attention. And as I got older, the tics kept getting worse and worse and worse until eventually I would have a lot of very strange tics that aren't as common. My left arm will just go numb on me and I just can't move it. Sometimes it will be the whole left side. Sometimes it'll be my whole body, or big chunks of my body will quit taking signals, but like 2 strands of muscle in there will. What's the point in that? I can't move my arm with 1 strand of forearm that's working, making my middle finger twitch. Like, that doesn't do me any good. And so all this time, we still don't have an answer. The only answer I have is every time I've gone to the doctor for this, they told me I'm faking it for attention. And my heart would race and drop down really low to nothing. It would race up high and then drop down and I would pass out. It would go up and down, up and down, up and down, and all my other symptoms are going crazy and I'm doing all these weird things. One side of my face might clench up and I can't move it. One of my most common tics now is when things start to get bad, my jaw locks up and now I can't speak. And it's just, it's hard to think when you can't open your jaw. I laugh that my kids' second language is grunt because my boys all know how to speak grunt and they know what I'm saying and what I need because they've grown up listening to it. My new stepkids have no idea what I want when that happens. Then things got really, really, really bad and I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't do freelance work anymore. Even if a job only was going to take me an hour to do, I could not promise that I was going to have an hour in the next 2 weeks that I was steady enough to be able to draw this for you. So eventually I had to shut down my freelance business and I'm just sitting there as a burden to my ex-wife and we can't get an answer to what's going on. I gave up on ever finding an answer. I just have a mystery illness and nobody's going to ever figure it out. And then, lo and behold, the local weatherman does a special on TV about what Tourette's syndrome is, because he's coming out and admitting that he has Tourette's. And the night before he came out and admitted, they did this show and they had this doctor on there talk about Tourette's, and everybody at church starts calling me like crazy. You've got to watch this on Channel 11. You've got Tourette's syndrome. I was like, no, I don't. The doctor told me I don't cuss and I don't bark like a dog, so it can't be Tourette's. And he's like, no, that's not it. You need to watch this. This guy looks just like you. I go onto YouTube, I pull up the video, and I'll be danged, he looks exactly like me. He's a big fat guy with a big long beard, and he's sitting in this chair just thrashing around wildly like I did all the time at this point. And he tells all about what Tourette's syndrome is, how it works on the brain. And this guy's just sitting here telling me, oh, it's Tourette's. And I've been told for years that it can't possibly be Tourette's.
As soon as I could write, I loved writing as well. I used to write like silly little poems and songs. But when I was about 9 years old, I kind of shifted my writing into more just sort of very practical, fact-based stuff. I had a bit of an incident at school, which was we were all told to keep a diary that we would just sort of submit to our teacher on a regular basis, that she said you could write anything in and it's not for public consumption, as it were. It's just like a little practice. And so sometimes I would write diary entries, sometimes I would write stories, and I was big into Enid Blyton and Famous Five and all of that kind of stuff. So I wrote some really quite terrible copies of Enid Blyton, and it was around me and my best friend at the time, and I think I called it the Terrific Two or something like that. But there was one time when I'd had an argument with my best friend and was really annoyed with her, and I wrote a chapter in this story in which I was really quite mean to I think I was doing, which I understand now, was just kind of processing my emotions and letting it out in a creative outlet. But yeah, I turned her into a bit of a bumbling fool, and she was making mistakes and, messing things up for us and all of that. And I wrote it and I felt better and didn't think anything more of it until I handed in the diary, and my teacher made an announcement and said that she'd like to ask someone to read an extract from their diary, and she was going to choose me, and she wanted me to read the last thing that I'd written. And I remember looking at her with this sort of horror of maybe she doesn't realize what she's asked me to do, and her looking back at me with this sort of straight look of, no, I know exactly what I've asked you to do. And I look back on it and I think, why on earth did she do that? And I think maybe she had genuine intentions of, you shouldn't be writing this kind of stuff, and I'm going to make sure that you learn the lesson. Maybe she had great intentions, or maybe she was just really mean. But either way, I had to then stand up in front of the class and read out this extract in which I had made my best friend into an absolute fool. And so the class was all giggling, and my friend was just getting more and more embarrassed. And it was just, it was terrible. It was a really awful experience. And I didn't consciously change anything from that point, but unconsciously I did. From that point on, I would tell people I'm no good at writing fiction. My fiction's just, I don't have the imagination for it. I don't have the playfulness or the creativity, but I became an absolute star at writing essays. So in some ways it did help me, but it took me a long while to go back to that kind of creativity.
As a teen, when I started writing songs and started playing in bands as a teenager, I was going to be the next big thing, the naivety of a kid. In some ways it's beautiful, in some ways it's not. But I was going to be a rock and roll star. And I played in high school bands. I was writing song after song in my teens. And when I got out of high school, I hated school. I figured I would never, ever need grade school. I don't need it. I'm going to be a rock star. So I barely passed grade 12. And then I got out and started working as a musician. Oh my. It took 1 year of playing cheesy dives of terrible places, of you ain't got it kid comments, and basically going nowhere. The reality that most musicians face when they first start in the industry. And I thought, I can't do this full time. I've got to get something else going. And I went back to school.
Just as there are many reasons for stopping, there are also myriad ways guests have come to understand that creativity is important to them, and that they should give it the attention it needs to make them feel happier and healthier. Here's Leanne Tibiatowski, episode 37, Peter White, episode 14, Juliet Sargent, episode 45, Mary Broddle, episode 49, and Suzanne Noble, episode 65, with their stories.
I'm in awe of this whole process. And so, as we all have experienced, COVID hit and life changed for everyone in many different ways. About a year and a half ago, I was laid off from my job. And I thought to myself, I'm going to surf. I get to be off of the grind and I get to surf. I'm just going to surf, surf, surf. I don't know what this is that's happening. They're saying 2 weeks, but I'm going to surf. 4 days later, the ocean closed. I was devastated. As I've shared, I made a choice, a personal choice, to not be on medication for PTSD. My medication is the salt water. It is surfing. So when the ocean closed, I had fear rise in me. This was a great test because I couldn't get my medication. You know, would everything that I've worked so hard to heal start bubbling back up again and take over? I didn't know. And in all of the uncertainty and in an environment where all of us didn't feel safe, and I felt desperate and afraid and alone and looking for ways to cope. So I remembered that the surf therapy program, the surf therapist that started it, before she did surf therapy, she was an art therapist, and she modeled this surf therapy program on an art therapy model. And out of desperation, I thought, I'm going to paint. I'm going to paint. And I had a surfboard in my backyard that my ex had shaped. And it actually was the source of a lot of feelings for me. We parted ways right after the hysterectomy, when I didn't know I had PTSD, when it probably wasn't the best time for me to make decisions. So I had a lot of angst around this board. I couldn't get rid of it. It was hard to keep. And so I had this process alone in my home with this big, beautiful board. And so I learned that using these Posca acrylic markers was what people used on the surfboards. And so I got some and I got this board out. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. But what I did do was a lot of healing. And I touched the board and I prepared the board and I began to feel the lines in the board to discover what to paint on it. I had tears on this board, not tears of upset, but just like releasing and appreciating. And I started painting turtles. I didn't even know I could paint turtles. And this colorful, flowy kelp and little line of sea turtles came out. And I couldn't believe it. I literally showed pictures of it to people because I didn't know where it came from.
I had a change in my life. The business was doing really, really well. We were growing. The company was growing. I was spending all my time at work. I'd have worked 24/7. It was nothing to do with earning money. It's something in our psyche about moving forward, being successful. And of course, that resulted in the inevitable heart attack on Christmas Eve, which was good fun for the family. So that sort of slowed me down. But fortunately, I didn't need surgery. They sorted it all out. And I was lying in hospital and I was analysing. You can only do this in like an unknown situation, like hospitalisation, where you have a lot of time, a lot of thought. And I thought, do you know what? I don't even like this bloke. And I thought, you're building this business, driving like a speed rope through the water. You're hurting people. It's all about ambition. And I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. If I can get myself out of this situation, this illness situation, and get my health back, I'm going to make a life change.
I always had that sort of love of landscape and gardening, but it was sort of unfulfilled, unrealized. And I was chugging along with my medicine, feeling a bit exhausted. And one weekend, my husband just sort of, I was moaning as usual, and he just sort of tossed me the colour supplement for the Sunday newspaper and said, "Look, why don't you do this new garden design course? They're starting up degrees in garden design. Why don't you do this if you're so fed up with medicine?" So I went along just to see what it was all about, really, and decided to take a break. I decided to stop medicine for a while. I was expecting our first baby, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just have a baby. As you do with your first, you think life will be exactly the same after. I'll just have this baby quickly. And then while I'm doing that, I'll do an extra degree. So I left medicine and went off to do the degree at Capel Manor whilst having and raising our first daughter. The idea was that I'd take a break, have Amy, do a degree, and then go back to medicine. But of course, by the time I'd been out for 4 years, I didn't really want to go back.
So I thought, well, I've got all these embroidery skills. It's what's kept me sane over 20 years of chronic pain and being stuck in the house a lot. And when I wasn't at work, I didn't have a social life because all my energy went on work. So I'd spend hours at home and I'd sew, I'd stitch, I'd put my feet up on the sofa because I had to rest. And by embroidering, it stopped me getting so frustrated and angry, and it kept my mental health on an even keel. So imagine you're stuck in the house for 3 months, which we all know what that's like now. But imagine if you couldn't have gone on that 1 hour walk, because what's the point if you can't walk? And you're a vulnerable person, you need to keep away from everyone. You get angry, you get frustrated, you want to do things, but you can't do things, you can't do it when you want. Well, what's helped me with that over years and years is just sitting and sewing. All sorts of traditional techniques I've done classes, I've taught myself through kits, all the lovely traditional stuff, but also just more contemporary things, some easier things for different energy levels, see what I feel like, something I can do in front of the telly with the family around, or something I can hide myself away for an afternoon and get in that sort of flow state for and really get that feeling of calmness that comes. So when you're sitting there, all the frustration just sort of dissipates.
I went on a holiday to a place off of Fire Island with somebody called Cherry Grove in Fire Island, and this guy that I was with, he knew from what I told him that I had sung in my youth, and there was a lot of performers on Fire Island that used to go there from the weekend, you know, mainly gay men off Broadway who would turn up in these piano bars, and the pianist would have a stack of music. And he said to me, this friend, he was like, "Would you like to sing a song?" And I said, "Oh God, I don't think so. It's been so long. It's been over 10 years now." And I was just turning about 40 then. And he said, "Yeah, but why don't you anyway?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. Anyway, after a bunch of cajoling, I went up and I sang My Funny Valentine, and everybody stopped talking. And people came up to me afterwards and they said, "Wow, that was amazing. Do you perform in New York? Where do you perform? Where can we see you?" And I said, "No, I don't perform anywhere. I haven't sung a note in 10 years except to the radio, you know." And they were like, "But you're amazing." And I said, "Well, thank you." And I suppose that started the stirrings inside of me of like, you know, why did I give that up? And then a friend of mine took me to a gig by a woman called Nikki Lambourne, who's in a band called Never the Bride. Big rocky band. She's got loads of tattoos, big voice, in her 50s. And I heard her sing at Pizza Express on Dean Street, and I was just blown away by her. And it really, at that point, I was a bit like, oh my God, there's a woman up there who's not far off my age, giving it all of this stuff, just belting it out. I think that really made me go, why am I not doing that?
Naturally, I've heard some emotional stories, but that doesn't mean they're all sad. Here's Lou Hamilton, episode 25, Ella from Glasshouse Theatre, episode 78, and Tara L. Lacey, episode 13, to give you a flavour of the lows and highs my guests have shared with me.
I was watching the television and I heard what I thought was thunder, and I went to the window, and it didn't seem to be thundery out there. And then the phone rang, and it was my landlady, and she was saying, "Are you okay?" "Yes, fine. Why?" And she said, "Oh, a plane has been blown up out of the sky above you." And so we just turned on the television and kind of watched it play out on TV like everybody else was, except that out of the window you could see the sky was orange and just mayhem. You know, we were just up a little hill, and down at the bottom was the sort of main road going up through Scotland, and that was kind of gridlocked. And then journalists were sort of coming and banging on the door because they wanted to use the phone. There was no mobiles or anything then. My parents couldn't get hold of me all night because the lines were sort of taken up by the emergency services. And the ambulances and the police and everybody kind of rushed to the scene, but nothing could be done because everybody was dead. And sorry, didn't expect that all these decades later. So we didn't really know what to expect when light came up the next day, and we didn't know what we were going to open our door to. Wow. We walked into town and you just saw bits of plain in the fronts of gardens, and we just didn't look up because we didn't know what we were going to see. And actually people did see the most horrendous things, in the trees and in their gardens, and people were really, really devastated. You never ever would want anyone to witness what those people saw. And so it was really devastating for the whole town and for the families. And the town was kind of overtaken by journalists, and it was sort of this media kind of storm. And you just didn't know what to do. You just kind of we just went to the pub, and everyone was just kind of sitting there, and this was like 11 in the morning, and just for a cup of coffee, and there were loads of journalists in there. And then we just heard one guy say, there was, because obviously everyone had died in the plane, but also 11 people had died on the ground, and some of the houses had been completely destroyed. And I heard this guy say, there's a child that he'd gone to the telephone box to make a call, and when he came out, his whole family had been destroyed. And it was just, it kind of almost like went into shock, I think. And I'm quite resilient in many ways, and although I've always been very, very fearful, when things actually happen, you kind of just have to get on with it. And we were alive, we hadn't lost anyone, and there was a sort of real sense of, in my head, that there was a kind of hierarchy of grief. I hadn't lost anyone, I wasn't injured, I still had my home, and therefore, I had no right to kind of feel the pain that other people were feeling. But I think what I did was just kind of bury it.
Because ultimately, the men and the women, they can't leave. So who am I to be able to then just walk away and desert them? And, you could argue, oh, yeah, but they've done something wrong, so that's the reason they can't leave. But it's like the trauma that they have witnessed in their lives is so extreme. And so you begin being like, oh, well, the trauma I've seen isn't half as bad. So surely, I should be able to stay. It seems pathetic because at the end of the day, I go home to a lovely warm bed and they have to stay within this prison. How can you leave that without shame? So a huge amount of shame leaving.
Yeah.
I lasted 12 months before I hated my job. I hated it. I hated getting up in the morning, and for some reason I stuck at it for another 5 years after that.
Absolutely love them, like family. Like, as cringy as it sounds, like they feel like part of my family. Like,
I still had this like really weird empty feeling, like I miss it. It's almost like leaving an abusive relationship. Like, you hated it and you hated the toxicity of being there, but you still love them. But you still love them, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just the weirdest feeling.
My grandmother had whipped me up a costume to play Jesus, and it was a sheet, as many people have probably had costumes made from sheets before by their parents or their grandparents. So it was the Easter production, the very first time that we'd done it for school and for the boys' school. So the auditorium was absolutely heaving with, adolescence, let's put it that way. 3/4 of the way through the play, and Jesus, that's me, was in front of Pilate. And one of the guards, what they had to do was get some red lipstick, essentially, and paint some, whip marks on my back. So they had to expose my back a little bit to be able to see the red blood. Unfortunately, one of my guards got a little bit overzealous with the ripping of my costume. So we are on stage and I'm kneeling in front of Pilate and obviously in huge amounts of pain as I was, being Jesus, and I could just hear this gasp and this silence, and I was thinking, what is going on? And I very rapidly realized that my boob was showing in profile, because obviously Jesus at 14 wasn't wearing a bra. And of course, I wasn't going to run off the stage, so I, carried on and trooped on. You think, well, I've got to carry on here. This is what I'm here for. This is what I'm doing. And a lot of people were quite impressed with that I didn't run screaming into the wings. But I think at that point, I thought, well, if my boob's been out on stage now, I could do pretty much anything. But I digress.
And don't think it's all seamless and plain sailing either. Real life goes on even when you're in the middle of recording a podcast.
So by the end of the first term, I started on medication, stimulants. So that meant that I could sort of pick up in the latter half. And thankfully, my lab work was still decent because I was on my feet. I wasn't sat still, so that was fine. And that was before another symptom called cataplexy kicked in, where you just collapse and use muscle tone and all of that, which I'll get onto in a minute. I was advised to retake the year. I didn't want to, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I would have never finished my degree. And that's something I'm really proud of, that I actually stuck with it and finished it, albeit it took 7 years instead of 4. But I think I developed a lot as a person. So I've lost my train of thought. You'll probably want to cut that bit, but sorry, you're going to have so much editing to do with me.
No, you're being very illustrative of what you're talking about, though, aren't you?
I do need to cut down, though, don't I?
No, not at all. So right now, for example, if you don't mind me asking this now, Ruth, have you had to take stimulants to be able to talk to me for a prolonged period?
Yes, in fact, while we've been speaking, I'm thinking I need to take my next tablets. So I'm actually going to do that right now.
Do that right now.
Yeah, so there was a big turning point when I was about 23. My brother unfortunately passed away in a car crash. Can we edit that bit? No, is it? Sorry.
That's all right. Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay. Goodness, Natalie. Oh.
Doing my makeup now. Sorry. Some of that. So, he unfortunately passed away in a car crash. Sorry. I'm just going to get a tissue. Sorry, Claire.
It's all right.
Which is still quite painful for me to obviously talk about. So, I mean, that was 16 years ago. But yeah, it still hits a nerve.
want to play around a bit more with natural dyeing of paper as well. What else? I'm also, I have a separate, knock on the door.
You want to go get it? Because I can wait.
Mind?
No, of course not. Is it something exciting?
It is. It's my garden waste sacks that I've been waiting for 6 weeks.
Good, I am so relieved.
Okay, sorry about that. Where was I?
Oh, I can't remember.
Okay, no, I know.
As Ruth Chipperfield, episode 71, Natalie Smart, episode 67, and Gail Jolly, episode 94, showed there, podcasting isn't about being slick and professional, at least not in the case of this show. Some of my guests have been contestants on those lovely feel-good art and craft television shows that I love, so it's been great to find out how they felt under the glare of the judges and cameras. Sally Ward, episode 58, was a finalist on Sky's Portrait Artist of the Year in 2020, and Rebecca Norris, episode 91, was a contestant in the 2023 series of The Great Pottery Throwdown.
I found it a really fascinating experience because I would say if I had predicted how I would have been in that situation, I would have said that my hand would have been shaking, that I'd sort of, I'd probably trip over something, or I'd be all nervous. I wouldn't be able to talk to the judges properly. And none of that happened. And I can only think that I was incredibly nervous in the build-up to it. And, there are lots of unknowns in that situation. You don't know who your sitter is going to be. You don't know what the production crew are going to be like. You don't know how that will all feel. You don't know whether you'll feel comfortable. So that was all horribly nerve-wracking. But the very odd thing was that once I started painting, and that sounds like, again, such a sort of cheesy thing to say, but once I started painting, I had been homeschooling my son for 10 weeks, flat out before that. And I tell you, it was a joy to not be homeschooling and to be painting. And I think I was just so grateful. I think because, the pandemic had been so difficult and had certainly meant that I had far less time to paint because of the children being at home and working. I think I just felt a huge amount of joy at being in that situation. I felt very lucky. And I just thought, I'm going to enjoy this experience because I'm allowed to paint here for the rest of the day. And then I'll never do this again. And what I hadn't appreciated was that I had to do it 2 more times after that. But in terms of, the production crew were fabulous, made us feel very comfortable. The chats with the judges were, again, thinking about it in advance. I thought I'd be very nervous and find it very intimidating, but I genuinely enjoyed our conversations. I had some amazing chats with Ty Shanscherenberg, one of the judges, who's an incredible artist. For an artist of that standing to be looking at your palette and saying, how are you going to approach this? And suddenly, again, sorry, cheesy comment, but it's like we were just talking the same language, and it all felt like it just clicked into place. And it was a really moving experience because of that as well, because for all the years leading up to that, I struggled even to say to people that I am an artist. And I think that whole experience of being on that programme just really affirmed to me that this is what I'm meant to be doing. And it's not that I don't like my other job at all, I do, but this is how I communicate. And there are other people who get that, and I haven't had those conversations before, and I just really want to have more of those conversations and immerse myself in this lovely world of art and people who love art and talk about art and think about art.
Creativity is so special to me that it makes me whole. Putting yourself out there on the line, I thought, what am I doing? do you know, what am I doing putting myself in this vulnerable position? And you don't really get the gravity of being on the TV because the cameras are there, but you can't really see it being on a screen, if that makes sense, because you're just doing what you're doing. So that bit was a bit removed, really. But yeah, those moments where you think, gosh, like they've picked me and I can't do this. What am I doing? But that was why I did it, to overcome those obstacles and to push myself and to challenge myself that little bit further in my process. And I knew it would. So yeah, it was emotional. And when Keith cried, I had to cry. You can't not cry when Keith cries. I mean, I cry at home when Keith cries. So being there in front of him, I was like saying to myself, don't you dare cry. Don't you dare cry. Don't you dare cry. And then okay. And that failure, do you know, I did on my challenges, I did fail quite a lot. And because of that pressure, you feel like the whole world has collapsed in on you. And I didn't quite realise how scared of failing I was until I did that, you know, because it was really, I felt really vulnerable. It felt like the only way I can describe it is that you were in the school hall when you were little and everybody else had got an A and you'd got an E and you were stood at the front of the hall and everybody was watching you. I've never felt quite as vulnerable, I don't think, emotionally than that, because and they were lovely. The judges were amazing, you know, and the crew were amazing. And they'd come and give me a hug, and I'd be in the canteen like, and the makeup lady would have to come and like, you didn't get makeup, but I think she just felt so sorry for me that slapped a bit on, because it had just been, yeah, really emotional. And you're tired, and it's the very long days, and it's emotionally taxing, and it's physically taxing, and mentally taxing. So you're already in a place of vulnerability, and then something just tips you over the edge. And but I can look back on it, and I would, if someone said, do you want to go back to Stoke-on-Trent right now and do it all again, I would be the first one to run to the car.
As the Creativity Founder podcast continues, and I get to talk with people all over the world thanks to the wonders of technology, I have also been able to take my portable microphone out and about to visit some super locations. Annie Sloane's paint production and decorative painting teaching has grown dramatically since we first worked together on books in the mid-1990s to early 2000s. So I was very excited to be able to visit her in her warehouse, office, workshop and factory space for episode 62. I visited Annie's studio while a group of stockists of her paints and products were happily learning how to use them and how to teach Annie's decorative painting techniques to others.
You can paint the paint on full strength and then use a wet cloth or a sponge to spread it around. That technique is best if you're working over a large area. So if you're working on a floor, you might find it easier to just paint a small area and then use a wet sponge or cloth to spread it around as you go. So you're working on a section at a time. That's good for working over a larger area. So I'm just going to use a flat brush, and I'm going to take some Louis Blue and mix with a little bit of water.
We found a typically Annie-style decorated meeting room with mismatched comfy chairs and a decoupage chest of drawers, where we had a super chat about Annie's journey and her enthusiasm for ensuring everyone that wants to knows that they can be creative.
Hello, Annie.
Hello.
It's so lovely to see you again.
Again, exactly.
Annie and I worked together a few years ago now.
That means a very long time ago, I'm afraid. A long time ago. And, yeah, will you explain?
It was when I was first in publishing, and I worked on a number of your books, and even had you come and paint my bathroom and a table in my house in Marston Road, because we're local to each other in Oxford.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that too. So we've just met up, and Claire reminded me of how we used it, painted the bathroom, and then took photographs of it and put it in one of my books. And I had actually forgotten that, but that was amazing. So we knew each other quite well for many years, and then how life goes on, and we haven't seen each other. I think we spoke on the phone or bumped into each other a bit, but probably not for about at least 10 years, if not longer.
Yeah,
maybe 15 years.
I think probably 15, because I remember we had a chat together about a possible new book project that you were thinking of, and that was when Charlie was a baby.
That's
Charlie's
right.
now 16, so
so it's about 15
years.
years. Well, there you go. And so thank goodness for podcasts. And I was also explaining to Claire that I absolutely love podcasts. So an opportunity to talk on a podcast is fantastic. But this is a podcast where we're actually in the same room, which is amazing. I love it.
I was also super privileged to be invited by pottery teacher Emily Chilvers to Royal Hospital Chelsea, where I saw a pottery session in action, chatted with a few of the pensioner potters, and had a tour of the hospital and a lovely lunch with resident Bert. Here I am chatting with Tony from episode 90.
I mean, the reason I came down when I arrived, I wasn't in the best position. I wasn't in the best situation. Talk about grumpy old men. Well, and I'm suddenly shown these things. I've never done this before. I'm sleeping all day. I might as well go down and do it. Because if I didn't do it, I'd sleep. And the more I sleep, the worse I am.
Yeah.
And so this is therapeutic to me. Life's, it's not quite right, but it started to be fun. And that started here.
Yeah.
You know, and I felt so relieved that I could be the person I am, really, not the person I had to show because it was work. And the person I showed had to be very caring, very helpful, didn't mind anything, spend any number of hours doing it.
And this was doing what?
I was doing occupational health nursing. But before that, I was in the army. And when you come out of that environment, you find home. You look around and the home hasn't been there for a lot of years. And then suddenly you get the catastrophe. Everybody leaves, or passes on. And you stood there with nothing. And then you arrive here. I had a year and a half where I just could not settle.
Yeah.
I wanted to walk away. And one of the things that kept me here was the fact that I could be with people who knew what I was. And the pottery was an outlet that I felt very, very comfortable with. I don't remember seeing Keith the other day, but he knew me straight away. And he sort of knew the place I was in. It wasn't a great place, so I kept away. Oh, I miss my pottery. Please, can I go back? And nobody was stopping me except men.
Yeah.
So the pottery itself is therapeutic in so much. When anything happens or anything, everybody is there. They'll keep away from you if you want. That's what, because they know, they feel it.
Yeah.
It's not like having a full-time course where somebody's going to teach you something. It's a learning space. And that's the way Emily does it. Gives you a sort of idea. And pottery begins. And it begins with you going out and rolling out a piece of clay. You don't have a clue what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But you roll it out, you get in there, and you just start. The difference is it's the person who teaches you to respond to the material.
To bring out
and that's
what wants to come out.
Yeah. And because perhaps I'm a little bit daft, but I honestly believe that any materials that you handle or move with it or sort of lean against, they've got life of their own. And I know it sounds crazy, but then again, I'm as crazy as they come. But that is what happens in that room. It holds you and it keeps you safe.
Yeah.
All the things that you want. And I've been able to work out with the material and enjoy it at no end.
Yeah.
You know, the thing about pottery is it doesn't matter and the mistake doesn't matter. It's your interpretation.
Yeah.
I recommend.
You recommend it?
Yeah. Recommend it.
As we head towards the final clip, I wanted to touch on another topic that comes up in the show, and that is to accept that you don't have to be perfect when you start. and that it is only by persevering with your craft, whatever it may be, that you will learn and improve. Through continuing to put out episodes and learning little lessons each time I do, my skills as a podcaster have improved, from speaking and interviewing to editing and production and much more. Now, I could go back and apply what I have learned over the last 3 years of podcasting to older episodes, but I'm not going to do that. I'm leaving those episodes as they were released. Keeping your first sketchbooks or any kind of early creative work is a great way to look back on your creative journey and recognise and appreciate how far you've come. And that's exactly what I can do as I revisit previous and present episodes of this podcast that over the years have made me very happy and taught me so much. Bianca Girola was my guest for episode 93, and she agrees with me on this concept of showing that the great work you produce now may be very different from the not so great work you produced at the start of your creative journey.
When people look at a finished piece of art of someone who has drawn that subject for a very long time, they think that it's impossible for them to draw it, that it's talent. It's not talent. I really, really, really want people to know that talent is something you make bloom. It's not something that you are born with. Like, you are born with this little seed inside, but it's you that you make this seed bloom into something. So I want to show people how much my first drawing were horrible. I was about to say a bad word. Were terrible. Because we are supposed to be terrible at stuff at the beginning. We have to allow ourselves to be bad. And this comes from someone who never allows herself to be bad at anything. But you have to be bad. Like, there's always an ugly stage in anything. Like, if you do something and you're super good at it from the start, great, amazing. I envy you so much. But that's not me. And that's not 99% of the people who come to a creative medium, whichever it is, especially in their adult life. You have to practice. You have to practice. You have to put in the work, and you can do it. You absolutely can do it. I want to show people that if they want, they really want, they can. Because I'm not classically trained artist. I'm just a random person who followed some YouTube tutorials and fell in love with the subject and put in the effort and ended up writing a book about it.
All that is left is to thank my wonderful guests and my fabulous listeners. I appreciate you all and have made some great friendships from my podcasting adventures. If you would like to give some financial support to the show, from as little as $3, scroll down through the show notes and click on Support the Show. If you use a modern podcast app, please send me a boost or a comment and I'll mention you on the show, unless you prefer me not to. Thanks for listening, and here's to the next 100 episodes. Thanks so much for listening to Creativity Found. I hope you enjoyed this episode and gained some value from it. If you did, perhaps you'd like to contribute a small monetary sign of appreciation, either by becoming a regular supporter from as little as $3 per month, using the link in the show notes, or if you're listening on a value for value enabled app, such as Fountain, TrueFans or Podverse, feel free to send a few sats my way. I also occasionally promote products that I personally use, so please use the affiliate link where relevant if you are buying from those fine companies. Thanks so much, I really appreciate it.